In a kingdom where battle horns had not sounded for a long time, ruled a young prince whose heart was full of justice, but whose soul was full of loneliness. His wise parents, the king and queen, left him prosperous lands, but the silence of the palace halls only oppressed him. He dreamed not of lavish balls, but of a true path. And he realized that the heaviest crown is the one worn in peacetime, for it weighs on the shoulders not with the weight of battles, but with the weight of unperformed feats. One day at dawn, looking at the sleeping lands, he made an unbreakable vow to himself, not to return home until he found his destiny, an adventure worthy of legends, and a love capable of lighting the stars. Handing over the reins of power to his loyal advisor, the prince left the castle, becoming an ordinary wanderer. His path lay through bustling cities, where in one of the taverns, steeped in smoke and other people's stories, he heard a sad tale from merchants.
Far to the north, beyond the misty mountains, stands the impregnable Iron Castle. There, a powerful warlock holds a princess of incomparable beauty captive. He does her no physical harm, but his evil will is the most terrible guard. He savors her fading hope like a rare wine. She languishes in her tower, waiting for a savior. And this story was like a dying fire in the fireplace. It was full of sadness, but a tiny spark of hope for salvation still flickered within it. One of the merchants, lowering his voice, added that many brave knights and proud princes, hearing of the princess's plight, had tried to save her. But not one of them could even reach the castle. The path is blocked by a dark, enchanted forest that lives by its own evil will. It tangles the paths, drives people mad with deceptive visions, and swallows anyone who dares to enter. All who set out for the Iron Castle vanished without a trace in its thicket. Thus, the forest that guarded the Iron Castle became a silent graveyard for dozens of knights whose courage proved powerless against its dark, shifting magic. The frightening stories did not scare the prince, but only strengthened his resolve. His heart burned with compassion for the unfortunate princess and anger at the evil sorcerer. He realized that this was the very cause he had been seeking. He stood up and loudly, for the whole tavern to hear, made a knight's vow to free the princess from captivity or die trying, and his vow rang out in the smoke-filled tavern as clearly and loudly as the clash of a sword against a shield. And everyone understood that it was not another seeker of glory setting out, but a true hero. The very next morning, after asking for directions, he set off on the path to the Iron Castle. Whether the prince rode for a long or a short time, he suddenly saw an incredible sight. On the side of the road stood a man whose feet in huge boots were planted on the ground, while his torso was lost high in the clouds. "Hey, friend, up there," the prince shouted, tilting his head back. "Can you show me the way?" The clouds parted, and a head looked down at him from a dizzying height. "I see all. I know all.
a voice boomed from the heavens. In that same moment, the giant shrank to a normal size. This was Long. He was so tall he could scratch the back of his head on the moon, and he suffered from great boredom because of his height. For he saw the whole world, but saw no task for himself in it. "They only ask me to pick apples from the treetops," he complained. The astonished prince gladly invited him to join his retinue.
The two of them went on, but soon their path was blocked by a wall of fire. A forest fire was raging, and then they saw a man of immense girth emerge from behind a hill. He calmly walked up to the flames, took a deep breath, and blew. Such a hurricane arose that the trees bent to the ground, and the fire went out like a candle. But he did not stop, and continued to inflate until he blocked an entire gorge, cutting off the fire's path. This was wide. He carried all the winds of the world in his immense chest, and could extinguish a fire or raise a storm at sea with a single exhale. When the danger had passed, he deflated to his former size. The prince, amazed by his power, gladly accepted him into his retinue as well. Continuing their journey as a trio, they came out into a wide clearing. A man sat there, looking at the sun, though his eyes were tightly bound with a black blindfold. The prince asked in surprise why he was doing that. "Ah," the stranger replied, "if I remove the blindfold, my gaze will become so sharp that whatever I look at will immediately catch fire. I can see through the earth and rocks, but there is no escape from my gaze." As proof, he lifted the blindfold for a moment and looked at a stone. It grew red hot and burst into flames. His name was Keen. He was a prisoner of his own gaze, and the black blindfold over his eyes was not a sign of blindness, but a shield that protected the world from his all-seeing and all-burning fire. The prince realized that such a gift would definitely be useful to them. Now there were 4 of them: the noble prince, Long, Wide, and Keen. The prince told them of his goal: to save the princess from the warlock's clutches, and asked for their help, not as servants, but as friends. His companions, who had suffered all their lives from their useless power, gladly agreed. At last, their gifts had found a worthy, knightly purpose. They swore allegiance to the prince, and all together they set off for the Iron Castle. Thus, 4 loners became one force, and the group, which might have seemed like a troupe of traveling circus performers, was in fact the most powerful army the world had ever seen. The path led them to that very dark, enchanted forest in which all previous heroes had perished. It stood as an impassable wall, its trees intertwined, no paths visible, and strange, deceptive whispers came from the thicket. Before them stood not just a forest, but a cunning trap, where every tree was a liar, and every path led to nowhere. The prince stopped his companions. He understood that to go head-on was certain death. He turned to Keen. "My friend," he said, "now it is your turn to show your skill.
Ordinary eyes cannot be trusted here. Keen stepped forward.
He asks everyone to step back and for a moment lifts his black blindfold. And his gaze, like lightning, pierced the darkness of the enchantment, separating truth from lies. And in the thicket full of deception, he saw the single thread of truth. He saw not trees and leaves, but the magical currents of the forest, all the false paths and illusory clearings. And amidst this chaos, he found one single path, thin as a hair, invisible to ordinary eyes, that led straight through the forest. "I have found the way," he says calmly, lowering the blindfold again. Led by Keen, they passed safely through the forest. But at the exit, a new obstacle awaited them. A wide and turbulent river, with neither a bridge nor a ford. The prince turned to Wide. "Now your help is needed, friend," he says. Wide nods, walks to the river, and lies down on the ground. He takes a deep breath and begins to drink. The river visibly shallows, and soon only a wet, silty bottom remains, across which they easily cross to the other side. Having crossed, Wide spits all the water back out. After crossing the river, they saw the final obstacle before them, a sheer cliff, on top of which stood the grim iron castle. "My turn," says Long. He begins to grow, stretching taller and taller, until his hands rest on the edge of the cliff. He turns into a living ladder. The prince, Wide, and Keen climb up him one by one, and the cliff, which had been an insurmountable wall for all the knights of the world, became for them just the last step, which they overcame with the help of loyalty and friendship. When everyone was at the top, Long shrank to his normal size. At last, they stood before the gates of the Iron Castle. The heroes entered the gates of the Iron Castle. Inside, everything was forged from cold, black iron. Their steps echoed loudly in the empty halls, where there were no servants or guards. In the throne room, on a throne made from a single piece of meteorite, the master met them. Tall and thin, in a black robe, with long white hair and icy, unblinking eyes. He did not look strong, but an aura of immense magical power emanated from him. He was not surprised by their appearance, only looked at them with a cold, contemptuous smirk. He sat on his throne like a spider in the center of a web, and his silence was more terrifying than any battle cry, for it was the silence of omniscience and absolute power. The prince boldly announced that he had come to free the princess. The warlock laughed. He clapped his hands, and a beautiful but very sad girl was brought into the hall. She looked like a wilting flower in this iron world. The prince and princess met each other's gaze. In his eyes were determination and compassion. In hers, a suddenly ignited hope. And their gazes met in the midst of this kingdom of iron, and that one look was enough for determination to bloom in the prince's heart and hope in the princess's. They fell in love at first sight, and now the prince's vow was not just a duty, but a command of the heart. The warlock, seeing their looks, only smirked. "To fight you would be too simple," he said to the prince.
I propose a game. He announced his cunning terms. I will give her to you if you can protect her for 3 nights in a row. Each night, from midnight until dawn, you and your servants must guard her in this hall. He added the main point. But if by morning she is not beside you, you all, you and your strange friends, will be turned into iron statues and will remain forever in my castle as a lesson to other fools.
He offered them not a battle, but a riddle, not a duel of swords, but a duel of wits, confident that his magic was more cunning than any human courage. The prince looked at his friends, at long, wide, and keen. He saw in their eyes not fear, but excitement and readiness for action. He realized that with such allies, he feared no magic. He turned to the warlock and boldly accepted the challenge. And his yes sounded in the iron hall not like the consent of a victim, but like a challenge thrown down by a player who knew he held all the trump cards. The warlock only laughed in response, confident in his victory, and left them in the hall with the princess to await the arrival of the first night. The first night comes. The prince and his 3 servants sit around the princess in the great hall to guard her. They do not sleep, do not close their eyes, watching her carefully. The sorcerer's magic was not in thunder and lightning, but in silence. Exactly at midnight, when the clock on the tower struck 12, his most terrible trick was performed before the eyes of the 4 awake guards. The princess, without a flash or smoke, simply dissolved into the air. In her place on the throne lay only a single golden acorn. The prince was in despair. He did not understand how it had happened, or what to do now. The prince is in despair, but his servants are calm. "Do not grieve, master," says Keen. "Nothing can hide from my sight." He goes to the window, and for a moment lifts his black blindfold, and his gaze, for which there were neither walls nor distances, flew through the night like a faithful falcon, and in the blink of an eye it found the lost prize. "I see," he says a second later. "The sorcerer is cunning. She didn't disappear. She became that very acorn. And he moved that acorn to the very top of the tallest oak tree in your home kingdom, 100 miles from here." 100 miles? The prince gasps. "We'll never make it before dawn." "That's my job," says Long with a smile. He steps out of the castle onto the cliff. He takes 1 step, and his legs stretch for a mile. A second step, another mile. In a few steps, he reaches the prince's home kingdom. For him, 100 miles were just a couple of steps, and the tallest oak was no higher than a roadside bush. He finds that very tree, stretches to his full height so that his head is above the clouds, and carefully, with 2 fingers, plucks the golden acorn from the very top. Long returns just as quickly and places the golden acorn on the table in front of the prince. They calmly wait for morning. At dawn, the warlock enters the hall with a triumphant smirk. But his smirk changes to a grimace of fury when he sees the golden acorn on the table. He had come to take their souls, and instead found his own lost game on the table. And the sight of this small victory was more bitter to him than the strongest poison. Before his eyes, the acorn flashes with light and turns back into the beautiful princess who smiles at her savior. The first night is won. The second night arrived. The warlock, enraged, decided to hide the princess even more securely. The prince and his servants guarded her in the hall again. Exactly at midnight, she disappeared again. This time, the sorcerer's magic was quiet and clean, like the work of a thief who leaves no tracks, no witnesses, only an emptiness where the stolen treasure was. She simply dissolved into the air, leaving nothing behind. The task became more difficult. The prince looked at his friends with anxiety. Now they had to find something that had no form, no name. The prince turned to Keen again. He again lifted his blindfold. This time he looked not into the distance, but straight down at his feet, into the stone floor. And the earth became as transparent as glass for him, and he saw the secrets hidden in its stone heart as clearly as others see clouds in the sky. "I see," he says. This time he hid her even more cunningly. She has become a precious ruby in the golden crown of the Stone King, who sleeps in the very heart of the Black Mountain, at a depth of 1,000 cubits. The task seemed impossible, but the heroes acted as one team. Long took Keen on his shoulders, and in a few steps reached the Black Mountain. "Now you," he said. Keen lifted his blindfold and fixed his gaze on the cliff. The stone began to melt from his gaze, and he burned a narrow, deep tunnel into the mountain, leading directly to the cave of the Stone King. "Now me again," said Long. He stuck his thin, rope-like arm into the red-hot tunnel, felt for the crown of the sleeping giant in the darkness, and carefully, with 2 fingers, removed the ruby from it. Thus, one pierced the mountain with his gaze, and the other with his hand, and their combined strength proved to be the key that could open the deepest and darkest lock in the world. They returned to the castle and placed the ruby on the table. In the morning, the warlock came. Seeing the precious stone, his face changed. Each of their victories was not just a defeat for him, but a personal insult, and his hatred grew like a crack in a rock, threatening to bring down the whole mountain. Before his eyes, the ruby flashed with light and turned into the princess. The sorcerer looked at the prince and his strange servants with hatred and a dawning fear. He did not understand how they were managing it. "One last night remains," he hissed, "and this time you will not win." The third, final night arrived. The warlock decided to hide the princess in the most inaccessible of all elements. Exactly at midnight, she turned into a small golden ring before everyone's eyes and disappeared. Her disappearance was accompanied by the smell of salt and the distant sound of the sea surf, which for a moment filled the iron hall. This time, he hid her not on the earth and not under the earth, but in the bottomless cradle of the world.
in the element from which all life came, and to which mortals have no entry. The prince understood that this was the most cunning of all trials. The prince turned to Keen one last time.
He went to the window, from which the distant sea was visible, and lifted his blindfold. And his gaze, which knew no barriers, descended to the very bottom of the ocean, and the secrets hidden under miles of water became as clear to him as the pattern on his palm. "I see," he exclaimed, "the trickster. He hid her at the very bottom. She has become a golden ring on the finger of the sea princess, a mermaid who lives in a coral palace at the bottom of the deepest gorge." This task required the efforts of the entire team. Long took the prince, Wide and Keen, and in a few steps carried them to the seashore. "Now me," said Wide. He lay down on the sand and began to drink the sea. The water receded, exposing the bottom. "Now me," said Keen. He pointed out the exact spot where the mermaid's coral palace was located. "And me again," said Long. He stretched out his arm, reached the palace, found the sleeping mermaid, and carefully, so as not to wake her, removed the golden ring from her finger. Thus, one crossed the distance, another drained the ocean, a third pierced the depths with his gaze, and a fourth retrieved the treasure. And their 4 gifts, merged into one, became a force capable of defeating any magic. Wide spits the sea back out. They returned to the castle a moment before dawn and placed the ring on the table. In the morning, the warlock enters. Seeing the ring, he freezes in place. He looks at the ring, then at the prince and his servants. On his face is not fury, but a quiet, cold realization. And in that moment, he understood that his magic, capable of hiding and transforming, was powerless against simple friendship and loyalty. And this defeat was more terrible to him than death itself. The ring flashes with light before his eyes and turns into the princess, who looks at the prince with love. The warlock, unable to accept his defeat, flew into an indescribable rage. His cold composure was replaced by animalistic malice. Thus, the losing player decided to flip the board, and his cunning, having been defeated, gave way to blind, destructive fury. He no longer wanted to play by the rules. "I have lost the trials," he hissed, "but I will not give her up. If I can't have her, then no one will." He threw up his hands, intending to incinerate them all with one final, deadly spell. He decided to destroy both the victors and the prize itself. The warlock began to chant a terrible spell, transforming into a huge black raven with an iron beak and claws. He rushed towards the princess to grab her and carry her away, and then destroy the castle. But he poured all his hatred into his final spell, and this hatred turned out to be such a poison that not even his own dark soul could withstand it. The magic he summoned proved too strong for him. Unable to withstand such an onslaught of malice, his new body of iron and darkness crumbled to dust with a loud cry. Thus evil, unable to defeat good, destroyed itself. The huge black raven, without even managing to take flight, burst in the air with a loud clap, like a thunderstrike. Thus the great and terrible warlock ended his path, turning into nothing, into a handful of smoke carried away by a draught, and not a trace of all his powerful magic remained. The warlock disappeared. Silence fell in the hall. The heroes looked at the spot where their enemy had just been. The battle is over. As soon as the sorcerer disappears, his evil spells begin to dissipate. The grim iron castle begins to change before their very eyes. The black iron of the walls lightens and turns into white, shining marble. The barred windows swing open, letting in the sunlight, and the walls, which had been forged from fear and iron, suddenly became light and bright, as if they were built from morning clouds and sunbeams. The castle fills with warmth and air. The curse is lifted. The princess, who had been standing aside all this time, was now completely free. The seal of sadness left her face, and it was illuminated by a happy smile. She approached the prince, her savior. She took his hand and looked at him with boundless gratitude and love. "You saved me," she said simply, and in her eyes he saw not just the gratitude of a captive, but the love of a queen who had found her king. The prince realized that he had found what he had set out for, his love and his destiny. The prince, the princess he saved, and his 3 loyal servants left the transformed castle. The journey home was easy and cheerful. The enchanted forest turned into an ordinary, bright grove. He had left his kingdom as a lonely adventurer and returned as a triumphant hero, leading his love by the hand and accompanied by his loyal, wonderful retinue. The people, who had given up hope of seeing their ruler, greeted him with jubilation, and when the people saw his beautiful bride, their joy knew no bounds. A magnificent wedding was held at the palace. Having become king, the prince did not forget his loyal friends. He rewarded them generously, making them his chief advisors and generals. Thus, their amazing gifts, which had been a curse for them in the world of ordinary people, became the main treasure and support of the new magical kingdom. Long built the tallest towers and bridges over chasms, wide drained swamps, and turned the wings of windmills. And Keen watched over the borders, seeing any enemy from 100 miles away. Each of them found a peaceful and noble use for their gift, and their service was the best reward. The young king and his beautiful queen ruled long and wisely, and their kingdom prospered. Their amazing story became a legend about how the most powerful sorcery is powerless against true friendship, courage, and ingenuity, and about how the strangest talents become the greatest strength when united by a noble purpose. And in their kingdom, it was long remembered that great deeds are not accomplished alone, and that the strongest ruler is the one who has loyal and amazing friends standing behind him.